Welcome to Shared Insights, the podcast from BA Insight. My name is Pete Wright, and today we present a conversation on deep text. BA Insight CTO Jeff Fried recently sat down with text analytics expert Tom Reamy on the eve of the release of Tom's latest book, Deep Text, using text analytics to conquer information overload, get real value from social media, and add bigger text to big data. Their conversation begins with the book, but ranges far and wide from there. Intelligent agents, cognitive computing, semantic technology, deep learning, and of course, search. These two experts offer insights into the direction of the field, all in the context of deep text. And now I'll turn it over to Jeff Fried with our guest, Tom Reamy.
So, Tom, it's delightful that we could spend some time together today. I've, as you know, looked through and read a draft of your book, which I'm very excited about. What prompted you to write this book in the first place?
Well, I've been working in the field of text analytics for over 10 years now, and one of the things that became very clear is that there's no really good description of what text analytics is. And I kind of got tired of these blank looks when I told people what I did. But also there's a whole lot of confusion about what text analytics is, what's the relationship between text analytics and text mining. For example, even Wikipedia. You look at Wikipedia and you'll see text mining and text analytics, and they talk about, basically interchangeable words. And to my experience, that's not even remotely true. And interestingly enough, even while they're saying that text analytics and text mining are the same thing, when you actually look at the descriptions underneath, the text mining description is all about mathematics and counting words as objects, and the text analytics is all about concepts and language and so forth. So even when they're trying to say that it's not that they're the same thing, they're basically presenting ideas that they're not the same thing. So that's one of the really big drives for writing this is to try to clear up that confusion. And what I wanted was not just a definition, a short definition of what it was, but I wanted to really talk about all the different aspects of text analytics, because again, there's no really good comprehensive book. There is one on text mining that's very good, but nothing at all on text analytics. And so I was actually approached by a publisher, and they wanted me to write a book on text analytics. And I looked at their list of their catalog of books, and they were mostly short technical books. And so that didn't seem like a good fit. And so I turned and said to my favorite publisher and conference sponsor, Information Today. And so that was what we agreed on, that I would write this very comprehensive book. We try to talk about what is text analytics, all the different features and functions, what's the business value, how do you get started in it, what are the best development practices and also the worst practices to avoid, what kinds of applications you can build with it. And then the book itself is actually divided up into 5 sections of 3 chapters each. The last section is on what I call enterprise text analytics, which is how do you build a text analytics program or initiative or foundation within the enterprise? And so that's really the whole story of trying to develop a really comprehensive look at text analytics.
I've also looked around and seen that nothing like this existed. There's a lot of academic monographs, but really nothing that's useful for people that are trying to put it to work, as you will. I've also noticed lately sort of a resurgence in AI concepts, intelligent agents, cognitive computing, semantic technologies. Is that what the book is about as well?
Not exactly. It does deal with it. Interesting enough, I'm probably dating myself, but I was actually around for the first real hype around artificial intelligence when they were going to be able to model common sense knowledge in the next couple of years. And in fact, I actually stopped working on my dissertation and went off in a different direction because of those claims. I and a whole bunch of other people were then, of course, disappointed. The latest hype, actually, I think, is it's got a lot more substance to it. What this book about is it's not, for example, cognitive computing. It deals with that in a couple of the sections, but it doesn't that's not the main focus. So, for example, deep learning is the technology behind Watson, for example, IBM's Watson. And so deep text tries to look at that and say, okay, this is great. They're doing some wonderful breakthroughs. But the breakthroughs are largely, and the deep learning itself is largely based on massive increases in speed of computers and size of neural networks that you can actually build. Now, neural networks, again, go back to the 80s, so that's not really new. So what I wanted to do in this book, and what I see as more important, is deep text as a way of adding depth and intelligence to, say, deep learning. And there's an article in the book that I talk about where there's one person, anyway, is trying to do a different approach to AI. And what he's trying to do is model AI more on how humans learn. Deep learning is not at all remotely close to how humans learn. Humans don't learn by being exposed to a few million examples of something, and then a pattern emerges out of their analysis of those few million examples, and they come up with a rule. Humans look at the situation and immediately overgeneralize from that one example, create an overgeneralized rule, and then they learn exceptions to it, refine it, and so forth. So what I'm interested in, what a lot of new other approaches to AI are interested in, is something that's modeled more on a human. And the reason for that is that for example, IBM's Watson's power, pretty much every 3-year-old child on the planet is better at language than Watson.
Yeah, that's true. It's funny that you put it that way because, as you know, I too have lived through waves of hype in semantic processing. I did text analytics and semantic search back in the bubble days. Mm-hmm. It's very nice to see a new wave of hype in the sense that there's new energy around it, but there's still lots of hype. I wonder why that's so, because I think that hype makes things more confusing for people who are trying to apply this kind of technology. So why is there so much hype in this field?
One of the things is that it's way more exciting to watch Watson beat the Jeopardy champions, for example, than to talk about how much value you get out of going out and hiring a librarian to make search work better by better metadata and auto categorization. That's just not really a gripping story. So that's part of it. The other is that an awful lot of, since there's a lot of technology involved in all of this, whether it's deep learning, deep text, cognitive computing, text analytics, there's a lot of IT involved. And companies that have that heavy IT investment and people that are in the field tend to want to believe the automatic story. They want to basically move people out of the equation and turn it all over to a computer, and because it's faster, cheaper, and so forth. And so I think they really are prepared to believe that the answer is yes, the software can do it all.
Even the idea that machines can understand human language is sort of a holy grail. Everyone relates to the Star Trek kind of view, and it's sort of a holy grail. That makes it exciting, even if the reality doesn't meet the hype, there's still a lot of value there.
Yeah, and we're in a lot of cases, what's going on is the hype gets people to, you look at something and you see it working partially and say, oh, wow, that's really cool. And you immediately extrapolate to what it would be like if it were really completely at a really deep understanding, for example, of language. But what's really going on is actually we're lowering our standards. And so, what we're seeing is that, well, the computer can do 60% job. Well, okay, that's good enough then. When in fact, of course, in some cases actually it is, but in other cases it's not.
It's interesting because we use all of these terms like language understanding as opposed to language processing, and all of these anthropomorphic elements, which also lead to the hype. You take something like sentiment analysis. It's now in regular use, even though it's not perfect, even though it may not even be 80% accurate, it's still very valuable. But I think it's hard for people to know what they really need and understand what's realistically possible. And, as a product guy, I've built lots of demos. It's very easy to make a text analytics demo that looks fabulous. You can make a cool demo easily, but it's really hard to make something that works reliably in the business environment of dirty data.
Yeah, we don't focus on that part. Say the demo, if the demo's there, if it looks good, then it's wonderful. Or for example, in the sentiment analysis example, I remember looking at the really early results. It was not much above chance whether something was really positive or negative or somewhere in between. I mean, it was, we're talking about maybe 55% accuracy. And that's when they were just doing simple keywords, positive words, negative words, and not looking at anything else. And so, I mean, if you look at that and say, wow, that's really not very good at all. But that's not what people were looking at. What they're looking at was, oh, look, see, here's an example of these negative statements that we picked up out of this whole stream. And it's something we couldn't do before without hiring huge numbers of people. So it is a plus, but it ends up looking so much better than it actually is.
I once built a system for a news agency that categorized photographs so that someone could say, I've got a story, what stock photos do I have that match it? And they were delighted. But I looked at it, it didn't really work that well. I mean, it often came up with photos that had nothing to do with the subject because it was looking at a tiny bit of metadata and then image processing, until I realized that, well, if it serves up 10 photos and 3 of them are good, that's much better than they had before.
Right.
So what are examples of things you've seen people really realistically do and get good business value of when it comes to deep text? What's possible today?
There's sort of 2 answers. That one is that what's possible today is pretty amazing. But of course, even more amazing is hopefully what's coming. But when I look at the actual applications, there's sort of 2 main areas, are enterprise applications and social media applications. And yeah, there's a lot of overlap between them. But again, it's most of the hype is around the social media part, and a lot of that is because it's actually easier to do. But in the enterprise, the still number one application within the enterprise is trying to make search work. Now, we've been trying to do that for so many years, and it hasn't worked without using text analytics. And so more and more people are realizing that, this is the way to actually make search work. And so that's a big one. Then once you've got something like that in place, then you can build, business intelligence applications that go out and look at all different kinds of content and say, okay, what are your competitors doing? Or you go and do customer intelligence. What are you doing to? What are customers saying? What kinds of issues are they concerned about? So those are fairly standard, regular applications. Another one we've done for a number of clients is expertise location, building expertise profiles based on an analysis of the writings of the documents that someone's published into the enterprise. So that one was a good one. News aggregation is actually very mature at this point. We did one actually way back, like over 10 years ago, a very early application, and that's still working really well. But one aspect of that, and we can probably talk about this later on, but a lot of the applications that are working well and that are sort of mature are applications in which it's not an automatic process. It's the computer does something that to then make the human work smarter and better. So it's a hybrid solution.
Humans in the loop is one of my favorite patterns because they provide supervision, et cetera. And that's one of the reasons that search is effective in this area, because it has humans in the loop.
Right.
Actually, this would be a fun thing to debate with you. What's your view of how search relates to text analytics? I mean, I'm kind of a search nerd, as you know. I think we actually probably met when I was doing some talk about how search and text analytics relate. Mm-hmm. Some, including me, would say text analytics is its own field and has really important applications as a module or part of a search engine. Some might say that all of search is an application of text analytics. Where would you come down?
The question is more to do with the focus and in some cases the culture of the organization that's looking at it, what they're primarily concerned with. I mean, they're obviously intimately related. Personally, I think that, yes, text analytics is the foundation that makes search work, and it also makes all those applications you can build on top of search, which we used to call search-based applications or info apps or whatever we want to call them. But yes, to me, I have to admit, text analytics is the sort of the foundation piece that makes it all work.
Yeah, it's fun because it's sort of not a single technology either. It's a set of techniques that have so many applications. What was the other application you wanted to talk about?
Social media applications, of course, are really big right now. Sentiment analysis but also not just sentiment analysis, but analyzing for other kinds of issues and concerns. For example, one of the projects we did was for a telecommunications company, and we're looking at the support of hundreds of thousands of these customer support notes that were where they were talking with customers on the phone. And so, we looked for sentiment, we looked for particular issues and so forth. But then, and this is to me one of the real powers of doing text analytics with rules, for example. We can talk about rules, machine learning as well. But the rules enable you to dive much more deeply into the text. And so in this particular case, for example, we built rules that were designed to determine whether a customer was calling to actually cancel their entire account, or they're calling for, or it just simply sounded that way. So what we ended up doing was building rules that could distinguish between whether just, of course, calling to cancel an entire account or just one part, which they don't care if it's just one part because that's they'll sell some more. But then the big part of it was distinguishing between statements that were really liable to lead to cancellation versus statements that were basically bargaining. So the text would say something like, I'm going to cancel my account unless you do so and so. Or if you don't stop calling me, I'm going to cancel my account. And so we built rules that looked for those kinds of bargain words like unless or if, and then built a rule that could then distinguish between real threats to cancel versus just bargaining.
That's fascinating. Certainly powerful because people use all kinds of language. I know I often use sarcasm.
Yep.
That's a hard thing to pick up.
It is. That's talking about holy grails. That's definitely one of the holy grails in this whole field is sarcasm.
If you were to suggest just 2 or 3 key things that people should understand about this area, about deep text, what would you want to get across?
The number one idea is that anything to do with text, the fundamental starting point is researching your own environment. Years ago, I used to study Greek language and culture and the whole self-knowledge as the highest form of knowledge. Well, in this particular case, I think it's absolutely true. And so, for example, most of the projects that we start or that we work on, the starting point is always getting someone to understand what their information environment is. And there's a lot of components to that. I mean, yes, you have to understand the information technology. Are they using this technology? Are they using SharePoint, whatever? So that's part of it, but it's way beyond that. That's actually the easiest to understand. But more, it's around understanding the people in the organization, the users. What are their information needs and behaviors? And what's the range of those needs and behaviors? For example, someone that's working on the phone dealing with customers, they typically want facts. They want quick answers that they can provide. Somebody that's doing deep research has very, very different kinds of needs. And so you have to understand what the range of those needs are in your organization. What are the communities within your organization? How do they communicate? What kinds of content do they need? What kinds of questions? The other really big one, of course, is understanding what the content is that you're looking at. What's the content? Where is it stored? How is it stored? What kinds of content structure do you have taxonomies, metadata, catalogs that you can use, but also what kinds do you need, and what are the content processes, the publishing process, the content management, the SharePoint. So that's sort of number one, is starting with really understanding the information environment that you're dealing with. Number two big one, I would say, is that, and we've talked a little bit about it already, is that to me, the future of text analytics and the best approach is to look at how to integrate things like machine learning and rules-based, how to integrate human and machine efforts, and coming up with hybrid solutions that are not being sold as automatic solutions, but hybrid solutions. And to me, one of the biggest examples of the limitations of it's the automatic, simple machine learning kinds of approaches. There was a recent story about Facebook and trending news, where they were accused of that there was a certain liberal bias. Well, when I read that story, to me, the most interesting thing was that with all the money and the technical expertise that Facebook had, their automatic part of the trending news processing got 60% accuracy. And all the rest, from 60 up to 80 to 90%, were with human editors working with what the programs provided. Now, if Facebook can't get better than 60% accuracy, what's an organization, much smaller, regular organization, going to be able to do?
So it sort of comes back to, first, knowing what you have, what you need, knowing your data, and secondly, looking to hybrid solutions.
Yes. To me, the best way to do text analytics is to look at it as a kind of infrastructure component, or an infrastructure approach. It's a foundation. It's not a project. You don't just go out and do your quick project and you're done. And that's even if that's all you really want is, a new search or a new social media analysis. If you approach it as just another kind of information project, you're not going to get the best results. You need to, again, it goes back to the research part, but it's more than just researching, but it's building a solution. Once you have the foundation in place, the good text analytics foundation, then you can build all different kinds of applications.
Sometimes I find that message about building a foundation is difficult in a business context because it's hard to measure whether, in such an abstract thing, is your taxonomy done or not? Is it quality or not? Because it's a means to an end, building a foundation in order to have applications. How do you help people through that dilemma?
That is a very difficult one, and one way that I've been making the argument is tying it into what are the best ways to get started, or in some other cases restarted. But what are the best ways to get started in text analytics? And because what I've been trying to argue is that the best way to get started is by building this kind of foundation. Nobody wants to sit and just work on a foundation for the next year or two before they actually see some results. And so my consulting group, we actually have been doing this for a number of years, and we have this process we call a smart start. And what it revolves around is a basic mantra. The basic mantra is think big, start small, and scale fast. And so the think big is that, research, the foundation. You need to understand the whole environment, even if you're not building an environment, but you need to understand it. You need to have maintenance and governance plans, because that's one of the areas that people fail on time and time again. They build something that don't have really good ideas for how to maintain it or govern it. So you have to have that think big part. That can be done fairly quickly and shortly and without a huge amount of effort. Then the start small part is there's a lot of different ways depending on the initial application that you're interested in. But the start small means build a proof of concept, build a pilot, and create the foundation while you're building the pilot. And what you do then is, and sometimes we've done proof of concepts that have been bake-offs between two different vendors. Other cases, it's just how to build a first application. The idea is not to build the whole thing, or even to build, certainly not to build a whole foundation, but by doing a pilot, you do a number of things. One is, of course, you learn how to use the software, but more importantly, it gives you the chance to build the kind of semantic resources that you need, taxonomies, metadata schema, and something we call catonomies.
That's cute.
I've come up with a number of new words in the book, and my guess is that I'll be lucky if 2 or 3 of them catch. But anyway, so catonomy is a combination of categorization rules and a taxonomy. So you build those, and more importantly, you train employees by doing. So they learn not just the software, but they learn the best development practices. Now, of course, we're a consulting company, and so our job is to help people do that. And so that's been one of our focuses. But to be honest, I found that most people actually do need that because they don't have the resources inside. And then the fourth piece of that, start small, is that by doing a small targeted project, you can see the results. You can see that this is actually something that's going to work. At the same time, understand what's going to take to build the complete application. And so that's when you get to the scale fast part where, okay, now we've got at least a partial foundation. We can start building apps quickly and economically and particularly avoid dead ends. I mean, one of the worst things you can do is say, okay, let's start this project and we're going to just build this giant foundation. And after a year, you discover that there's these 3 fundamental flaws, and you're not going to be able to build it the way you wanted to. So I think this kind of process is how we've been able to, or really tried anyway, to really push the notion of creating a foundation, but doing it in a smart way.
That's great, because I find people are afraid of investing in these giant foundations, and the days of 3-year-long taxonomy projects with taxonomists that are off in a corner, those days are gone.
No, I absolutely agree. I think those are gone. And in a lot of ways, the type of taxonomies that people were building in those kinds of big multi-year projects are being replaced as well. And part of the reason for that is the power of text analytics. I know you go out and you look at these giant taxonomies, mesh, which are huge, 400,000 terms or whatever it is, the current one. And those are good for one kind of thing, really heavily detailed academic kind of indexes. Well, that's not a very powerful application. So if you want to actually build applications with a taxonomy, these days people are doing much more. They're doing smaller taxonomies, and specifically they're doing faceted taxonomies where you have multiple taxonomies, and then you're figuring out how they relate to each other. How they can relate to each other in different kinds of search or different kinds of applications.
Hallelujah. Yep. I mean, we do this partially because we have the tool set or a classifier that works with taxonomies and rules and does what you talked about as hybrids. I'm often trying to help people take big taxonomies and break them into small factors, or even such common sense things as, here's something about geography. Keep that by itself.
Right.
Here's something that's about your product lines. Keep that by itself. And, a dozen small catonomies is much better than a giant one.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the ways that we found you can actually do that, we were hired once back real early on by a large consulting company that was doing science and engineering consulting. And they wanted us to build, this was again 10 years or 8 years ago, something. They wanted us to build a big enterprise taxonomy. And so we started working on it. And as we were analyzing, one of the things that came very clear is that there were certain kinds of concepts that were appearing throughout this taxonomy in every different field, in every different discipline. Methods, for example, is one of them. I mean, there's chemical methods, there's engineering methods, and pulling methods out as a separate facet. When you can actually use those big old antiquated taxonomies in a number of ways. And one is to do something like that, where you facetize the taxonomy. Another way that we found is actually very interesting to do is that we've taken, like they say something like mesh, where you've got 5 or 6 levels, and you roll up the bottom levels to that third level. Use all the terms that were at that levels 4 and 5 in your taxonomy as part of a categorization rule, and keep the taxonomy itself as a good, simple, humanly understandable 3 level.
That makes a lot of sense. Nobody clicks more than 3 levels anyway.
Yeah.
What gets in people's way of using deep text well?
I've thought about that a lot because that's something, obviously it's the field that we're both in. And I think that there's a whole bunch of things, but some are small and some are large. One of the fundamental ones, of course, is just lack of familiarity. People don't understand what text analytics is and what it's promised and what you can do with it. Hopefully, the book will help in that regard to some extent. But another related one is that there's a lack of resources in a lot of organizations now that really are the ones that are needed for the human side of the text analytics types of applications. Taxonomists and librarians, for example. The trend has been to reduce those. And that doesn't mean you have to go out and have a whole big library staff, but it turns out that, for example, certain librarians, if you get them out of the library and get them involved in, like, say, a text analytics kind of project, they're absolutely essential, but it's a different function. So they either don't have librarians or they're stuck in the library. So it's a lack of resources. I think there's also a kind of a cultural clash. There's the clash between information technology and what we're doing with text analytics, but basically it's between information technology and deep understanding of language. So information has to do with meaning, not just numbers. Another is lack of standards. I mean, every project is a custom project, and that's great for consulting companies. It's not so great for customers. And one reason for the lack of standards is, again, there's a lack of foundation resources. There's no big, there's libraries of taxonomies, but again, every one of them has to be customized. But fundamentally, to me, the single biggest issue is simply the complexity of language. Language is very, very complex, and we're trying to understand it in a deeper level. And that's why simple text mining applications, for example, can resonate with people. Because there you get doing away with meaning largely. You're just using sort of dictionary lookups and you're counting words as objects. But once you get beyond that and try to understand what does this mean, what does this sentence mean, what are the issues involved, it's very, very complex. And there's no way around that except, again, to build better and better solutions, better software, better models. And it's something that isn't going to be done overnight. It's not as amazingly sexy as Watson, but it's what's fundamentally needed. It's difficult.
That's true. I still find that once people get into it, though, they can leverage sort of, what was your mantra? I liked it. Think big, start small, scale fast. A series of projects that each deliver value, that, maybe starting with less complexity and less depth in understanding, but building up to it.
Yes, and that's exactly, I absolutely agree. For example, when I talk about text analytics as a foundation, again, we're not talking about some huge, in-depth, giant research projects or navel gazing or whatever, but you have to have some level of understanding, I think, to get the best out of the overall process. You have to start small. You have to have those series of projects. And once people learn how to do it, I'm kind of amazed at who it is within organizations that I end up working with that are the ones that become the champions that really learn how to do this stuff really well. Sometimes, as the obvious sort of job description will be a librarian, but very often it's not. It's somebody that's in some business group or in the customer relations group or marketing, and they just happen to be the ones that the language issues resonate with.
Yes, and they often are the people that understand their data because they understand their business.
Right.
How can people get started? I mean, if you now have a sense that deep text and this area has a lot of potential for you, where do you get going?
Well, the obvious answer is you buy my book.
Okay, I guess that was a softball.
Yes. No, and yes, of course. I happen to think yes, that would be a great way to get started. That whole process that we have called the Smart Start, I think, is that's the way to get started. And that's the smart way to get started. The think big, start small, scale fast. And what that ultimately means is, of course, you have to have champions within organizations. You have to have starting applications that people have in mind. But if you do start small with the deeper understanding, then I think you're going to avoid a lot of the problems that people have. But probably the single key issue in starting isn't found in the start. You can start a lot of projects and get some value out of them. The big issue is planning for what comes after the start. How are you going to continue to refine these resources? How are you going to continue to apply them and govern them? And so that's a piece that's very often missing, and that's the one that I think is most danger. But probably the biggest danger of getting started in this is you get started and you're moving and you think things are moving along, and then you run into a brick wall and you don't know how to get beyond it because you haven't either done the research or you haven't developed the right kinds of foundations and structures. And so, that's something that I think is a major problem for people in this field.
Yeah, so that's a pothole to watch out for. And I know in your book, there's a whole part of the book that's about getting started, goes through the Smart Start and even some stepwise evaluation techniques. So as a reviewer, I'll say I heartily recommend the book. I'm really glad you wrote it, but I'm also thrilled that we could spend some time together talking about this subject and helping the listeners be successful. So appreciate your time very much, Tom.
Oh, absolutely. I'm very happy. I'm always happy to talk about this stuff, but particularly with someone that like yourself that has been there as well and understands some of the issues and problems. But so I appreciate greatly the chance to talk to you.
Thank you all for joining us. Don't forget, you can listen to the show anytime over at bainsight.com or subscribe for free in your podcast application of choice. On behalf of Jeff Fried and Tom Reamy, I'm Pete Wright, and we'll catch you next time on Shared Insights, the podcast from BA Insight.